Well, good evening. This is another episode of National Divorce Talk Raw. This is going to be a smorgasbord episode. We have a variety of different talking points and issues in the news around the topic of national divorce secession and the continuing diminution of support for the American Democracy Project. Basically, people are not believing the system works anymore. And that's the sign that happens right before civil war or collapse. The Soviet Union was famous for how large they got and how bureaucratic. During their time when they were operating, they had a huge organization and they could do many things and they were in control of many things, but they weren't very good at it and the bureaucracy wasn't very effective. There was a saying in the Soviet Union that was exceptionally popular about 3 years before they collapsed, and it went like this: you continue to govern, continue to act like you're governing, and we'll continue to act like we care. Basically, while the Soviet Union had total control over their people, they had lost the hearts and minds of the people. The public knew that they were corrupt. The system didn't work. They weren't going to fight back, but they didn't really believe in it. And that's why you had worker shortages. You had people not really participating. You had factories producing products at 50% of their effectiveness because nobody really bought into the system. They were like, I know I can't fight you, but I'm just going to play along, but I'm not really believing what you said. And that's why the whole system collapsed, because it didn't really work for the people. They lost support of the public, and then eventually they lost public support from the public. But point is, years before, just a few years before the Soviet Union collapsed, Soviet citizens were routinely saying, you pretend to act like you're governing us, and we'll pretend to act like we care. Basically, the system was collapsing, and they had no more faith in the system. Now, at that point, nobody said that meant the Soviet Union was going to collapse. But now that we see that the Soviet Union has collapsed, it's easy to go back and go, well, look at this phrase that everybody was saying. They didn't believe in the system. They had no faith in that Soviet system. A few years. And so when the pressure came, it totally collapsed, but you had no popular support of the public to support it. And so we can look at the dissolution of the Soviet citizens with the Soviet Union, and we can see that is presenting a harbinger to the eventual collapse of the Soviet Union. So what does it mean when we see a similar sentiment here in America today? We're going to get into that in today's show. But first, okay, I'm just going to show you the variety of news points, and we'll take it where it goes. So here, let's get right into it. This show isn't as structured on a particular issue as other ones are. This is kind of a catch everything that's going on in the media just to make sure that you're informed. So first thing we want to point out is here's this article by the LA Times. After a week of guns, abortion, and insurrection, California resistance matters more than ever, Los Angeles Times. But here's the thing. To me, the brazen indifference to adversity, and even when it sends a census, is what unites Angelenos and Californians. And California were stunned. 5 black-robed jurists are gleefully dismantling an America we took for granted, crushing our ability to keep guns off the streets, government out of our uteruses. And the January 6th homes pounded just how close we came to a coup. So here's the LA Times. They are shocked in that they're saying that California is shocked that the Supreme Court justice could gleefully dismantle an America they took for granted. They never saw that coming. And here it is, and they are shocked that the Supreme Court could do this. Well, they're not alone. And this is what the Los Angeles Times said. They're shocked that happened. They're not alone. So here's Deborah Messing. Deborah Messing was a very popular actress back in the day. And she says there's no point in voting after Roe v. Wade is overturned. On a recent phone call with the White House, it is reported that the Will and Grace star Deborah Messing said that although she claimed to have gotten Joe Biden elected, she felt there was no point to even voting. In the wake of the U.S. Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, the White House arranged a virtual meeting between the president's aides and dozens of celebrity supporters, according to CNN. A report based on conversations with 3 people who attended the call. The mood was fatalistic, meaning we're going to die. Messing was particularly vocal. She helped Joe Biden win in all of these places. She really stumped for him. And then she started yelling. And then basically she said, what's the point of voting if after I get you elected, Roe v. Wade happens? So that's Deborah Messing saying that. What's the point of voting? We worked really hard. We got you in. The Democrats won the House. The Democrats won control of the Senate, or at least the Republicans didn't win control of the Senate, and you still can, and then Roe v. Wade happens. That shocks us. You know, we're shocked that this could happen. And here's Deborah Messing also shocked that after massive Joe Biden won. The Democrats controlled the House. The Democrats prevented the Republicans controlling the Senate, and they still could not stop this from happening. And here's why. Because as Norman Ornstein said in 2018, I want to repeat a statistic I use in every talk. By 2040 or so, 70% of Americans will live in 15 states, meaning 30% found in 35 states will choose 70 senators, and they'll be 30% older, whiter, more rural, and more male than 70%. So 35 states will have 30% of the population, and they will control everything. A minority will control the majority. We pointed that out in 2018. All that gray spot, that's the minority population who owns more states than the blue circles. So that means, and here's Think Progress backing it up. There's a lot of other people backed it up. So basically, you look at Trump, here's the population, there's the Trump. Who voted for Trump? Look at the gray, that's the interior. Look at the light blue, green, that's the population states. So you can see a lot of low population states voted for Trump. And those 35 states, seen here mostly in red, are mostly rural, low population. And because they're 35 states, and because the way the Constitution is constructed, they will control everything. As Paul Waldman said, in the age of minority rule, the Supreme Court justice appointed by a president who got fewer votes is confirmed by a party in the Senate that got fewer votes to validate policies opposed by most Americans. So Paul Waldman and Norman Ornstein are having a conversation in 2018, 4 years ago, where they're going, wow, because of minority rule, you're going to have the Supreme Court enact these regulations that are wildly out of line with what most Americans want. And the court, meanwhile, isn't just polarizing along partisan lines. Its decisions also increasingly align with the views of the average Republican voter. The Supreme Court is doing what it does to speak to the average Republican voter. That's an analysis from 538. Well, who are they talking about? These are all the states that now ban abortion. You're looking at it. All the states in gray that now ban abortion. Take a look at those states. Okay, see how it's mostly the South and the Midwest and the interior? And then let's take a look at this map. See the gray parts? Midwest, South, the interior, gray, population. The blue circles are the population areas. Yeah, Texas is there, and yeah, Texas is part of the conservative coalition, and so Florida is too. But in general, look at the blue circles, population areas, compare them to the gray circles, gray squares. That's where the 35 states exist that have a 30% of the population and will control all the decision making. And so 35 states have 30% of the population, and they'll be older, whiter, more rural, and more male than 70%. And that's why the Supreme Court can do things that shock the hell out of Californians and convince them there's no point in voting, because there is no point. You cannot outvote 35 states. It doesn't matter if you had the majority of the vote. That's what they're saying. And here we go. Extremists who have opinions out of touch with most America will routinely be appointed to the Supreme Court. We told you that the Supreme Court decision that was going to shock the hell out of Californians, convince people not to vote, was going to come in 2018. Told you. And the reason we said it was 35 states now control America, and they are 30% of the population, and they're massively out of line with us. But they do fit in line with the average Republican voter. So the average Republican voter is a minority, but the Supreme Court is speaking directly to them. The Supreme Court is speaking to this average Republican voter, the average Republican voter who is older, whiter, more rural, and more male than everybody else. The Supreme Court speaking directly to them. Here's about 35 states that banned abortion. Here's about 35 states that basically elected Donald Trump. Do you see the pattern? Ban abortion, elect Trump. Ban abortion, elect Trump. Ban abortion, elect Trump. It's the same group. They control America. That's why democracy doesn't work. That's why you're shocked. That's why you don't get that even though you won the House, you stopped Republican control of the Senate, and you took the presidency, you don't get the things that you want. That's why. There it is, 26 states likely now to criminalize abortions, often without exception for rape, incest, or life-threatening pregnancies. That culture is radically out of line with Californians. Here's who those people are. And if you're curious, yeah, people are already comparing that situation to the Civil War. They're saying, the Washington Post had someone on saying that people trying to leave anti-abortion state to go to a state where you can get in abortions is like slaves running away. Now, the Fugitive Slave Act and the inability of the North to support it is what created the stress that led to the Civil War. So, yes, you are having Washington Post and other people drawing a direct line between this situation of all these states that ban abortion and how the Civil War started. Not idle chatter. We are closer to civil war than we were 50 years ago. Robert Putnam of Harvard, an eminent and even-tempered sociologist, told me the only comparable period in our history, I think, is 1850 to 1860, the decade that led to the Civil War. Robert Putnam of Harvard is one of the preeminent sociologists in all of America. He wrote the book, The Big Sort, that talked about how liberals and conservatives are moving away from each other and moving into communities of ideologically similar people. He was the first person to document, famous sociologist. And here's Robert Putnam saying, you know, division in America is so bad. The last time it was this bad was the Civil War. Right after someone talks about the Civil War, talking about how women banned from abortion will go to states where they can get an abortion, like this map, and that will create a Civil War conditions. And here's a preeminent sociologist saying, wow, the division's already as close to Civil War culturally. And here we see the mechanisms for the Fugitive Slave Act equivalency happening that caused the Civil War. Here's where that article came from. And just to pound it home even more, the Supreme Court marshals asks officials to end protests outside the Justice Homes. This is the New York Times. And here's where we go. The chief security officer of the Supreme Court has asked the Virginia and Maryland officials to enforce laws that would prohibit protests. So you have a law enforcement officer of the federal government begging law enforcement officials in states, Maryland and Virginia, to please enforce their laws. Hey, Virginia and Maryland, you already have laws that say you can't allow this. I'm a top law enforcement officer for the federal government. I'm begging you to enforce your laws that prevent the justices from being intimidated or murdered in their sleep, as we learned that somebody tried to kill them. So when law enforcement agencies are begging other law enforcement agencies to do their job so that the top legal officers don't get killed, that's a horrible, bad sign. Kind of like what happened right before the Civil War. And it shows a level of polarization like right before the Civil War. And just to add it up, so here we go. The Biden administration needs to act like blue state, California, Oregon, Washington are taking action to protect abortion rights than the federal government. Yeah, that sounds great, but here's the thing. Let's think this through. There will be an America that takes its cues from Texas and an America that takes its cues from California. Already, California bans the state use of funds to travel to another of states that have enacted anti-gay, anti-trans, and other discriminatory legislation the state sees as being antithetical to its values. There you go. California values, opposite of American values. It's almost inevitable that California will use its massive economic clout to enact more bans against states that end abortion rights in the wake of the Supreme Court decision. And because where California goes, so many other blue states follow, it is probable that in the coming months and years, such travel bans will be commonplace. Such travel bans will become commonplace. It is also equally likely that in response, red states will ban the use of funds to travel to places in which abortion remains illegal. if we're talking about 26 states that back this, 26 states that back this, and now they're going to ban travel to California, and California is going to ban travel to them, you're starting to see where the country is going to achieve a higher level of split. So we've already had people on their own individually doing the big sort. Liberals leaving an area and going to a more liberal area, conservatives leaving an area and going to a more conservative area, just like Robert Putnam said. But now we're going to the next level, which is states will ban travel to other states, further polarizing America. So polarization is already super horrible, and it's about to get worse because states are now going to start banning travel to other states. Here we go. Let's take a look at this.
We've got so much violence around the nation. School shooting and everything feels somewhat connected. They're saying, or just recently, there have been articles popping up saying that we have probably entered the bleeding Kansas phase of civil war. Now, they call this the bleeding Kansas phase of civil war. For these 7 years, from 1954 or 1854 to 1861, that 7-year span, Kansas was looking to be a state in the United States. But there was a even split among the Senate, who was in the pro-slavery states and the anti-slavery states. So whichever state got Kansas senators, whichever side got Kansas senators, would win the argument outright. The majority vote. Yes, they would win the majority vote because they would have the majority. So via the Kansas-Nebraska Act, they decided to let Kansas and Nebraska both come in and vote amongst their own state whether they would be for or against. The most fair way to do it. They said, okay, we'll do this. Nebraska voted their way. Kansas was looking to be the tiebreaker to one side or the other. All right, so looks like the tiebreaker is going to go to one side or the other. Kansas is going to be the tie-breaking vote. And so a lot of violence erupted in Kansas. And this was taking place over 7 years. Now, in the violence that we have had recently, especially the last 2 years, but really for the last 4 or 5, more people have died due to political violence than died during the entire bleeding Kansas situation.
So what they're talking about is in the lead up to the Civil War, you didn't just have the Civil War and the South went out against the North. That's not what happened. So you had the Fugitive Slave Act. The South was saying, we feel uncomfortable and insecure about our ability to have slaves being protected, which, yes, is morally wrong, but it was perfectly legal under the Constitution. Sorry. And so they passed the Fugitive Slave Act, so the North, which the North signed on and agreed to. And it said if the slave escapes and goes to the North, then they can be captured and brought back to the South. But the North didn't really follow that. And that put pressure on on the South, because they thought, well, we're in America, and we had this law to protect slavery, and half the states don't really participate in the law, so we don't really have a federal government that protects our institutions. So because the North didn't follow the fugitive slave law, it encouraged Southerners to begin to think that the federal government won't protect their rights. And technically that was true. That law was passed by Congress, meaning the North and the South. So the North agreed to it and then said they're not going to do it. And the South said, this is a law. Slavery is legal in the Constitution, and now you're backing away from it. So we don't really believe that you're fair arbiters, or you play fair. And that created the tension that led to the Civil War. The other thing, while that's going on, so that's around 1850. Then between 1850 and 1860, so you have fugitive slave law breaking down cohesion and belief in the federal system. Then you have this kind of arc, and you get to about 1860 with the Civil War. Now, this in-between period between the Civil War and the Fugitive Slave Law, 1856, Civil War 1860, Fugitive Slave Law 1850, Civil War 1860. That in-between time between Fugitive Slave Law 1850 and Civil War 1860 was the Bleeding Kansas period. And Bleeding Kansas, nobody really expected that to happen. So basically what happened was they said, each state coming into the Union can choose if they want to be slave or not. So a bunch of people went to Kansas and said, I'm going to make sure this is a slave state. And then other people said, well, I'm going to make sure it's not a slave state. And since it was on the frontier, they just started shooting each other and killing each other. And over a 7-year period, you had basically what we would call an insurgency today. No formal armies, no real big armies on battlefields, but a lot of people and little skirmishes constantly shooting and killing each other. You know, the kind of thing where somebody walks out of their house and is shot dead in front of their kids. It's not a military invasion, but it looks like Baghdad or Libya or Yemen or Syria. Kind of a civil war insurgency thing. That was Kansas, the Kansas Territory, for about 7 years between the failure of the fugitive slave law and the beginning of the Civil War. So you have fugitive slave law. The South is already losing their faith in the Civil War. And then you start getting into a mild, low-level shooting war in Kansas, and then you get to the Civil War. So we're not going to follow your laws. Whoops, I don't believe in the system. Now we're actually shooting and killing each other. In a faraway place, not in big numbers, but we are actually shooting and killing each other. Faraway place, not big numbers, but we're actually doing it. We're murdering each other. And we're killing each other and trying to use terrorism to create the government that we want. And both sides did it. That was called Bleeding Kansas. Well, as he was just saying, you have a lot of people dying because of political violence in America last couple of years because of political division. Anybody dying because of political division, any capability, that's a low-level insurgency, like Bleeding Kansas. And I just showed you where we have the top law enforcement officials begging states to enforce the laws they already have to keep judges from being executed. So I don't think the analysis that this is the Bleeding Kansas period leading up to the Civil War is that off. And I just showed you why. That's your update of a look around America at this moment. As we come to more people not believing in democracy, not believing the system works for you, and steps in parallel with the historical ones that led to the Civil War being enacted daily. Making sure that you're informed with the information the media just won't make sure you ever get to see. We'll see you soon.